Hello, and welcome to Words in a Time of Lockdown, a podcast from the Writer's Block, exploring creativity and creative writing in a time of change. The Writer's Block is the Creative Writing Centre for Cornwall, and I am Polly Roberts, a writer and member of the Writer's Block team. This season, I'm talking with writers living in and connected to Cornwall. We hope you find some warmth and inspiration in what you hear. In this episode, I speak with Emily Barr, author of 12 novels for adults and 4 for young adults. Emily began her career as a journalist, and through numerous happy accidents, she's become a prolific and varied author, with international publications of horror, psychological thrillers, YA, and more. Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for joining me today on this podcast. It's a very odd time. We're in our third lockdown. God, I can barely believe it.
I know.
How are you doing?
Oh God, okay. It's all getting a bit old now, isn't it? And the weather's not as nice as in the first lockdown, and it's a bit hard to remember what day it is or what time of day it is or anything. Yes, all a bit grim.
It really, I think the weather does make a very big difference this time around, or at least for me. And just like you say, it kind of getting a bit old. I mean, so you were working from home, homeschooling, and trying to write. Is that right? All at the same time?
Yes, I am. Although the homeschooling isn't too bad because my children are older than primary age. They're all in secondary school. One's at university, one's at sixth form college, and one is in year 10. So she's the one mainly doing the homeschooling. And doesn't need too much interaction. I really feel for the parents doing the whole primary school curriculum from home while trying to write their books and do their work and things. It must be awful.
It must be so difficult. Do you normally do a lot of your work from home anyway, the writing element of it?
Yeah, I completely work from home. So in that sense, it hasn't made very much difference to me, except emotionally it feels very different. But yes, I always work from home, although I do always, when I get to a point where I just can't bear it anymore and the walls are closing in on me, I used to pick up my laptop and just go and sit in a cafe and carry on writing there, which obviously isn't an option. But then again, there's a pandemic, and if your worst problem is that you can't go to a cafe, then I think you're doing quite well.
I mean, I'm fully with you on that. It's a very valid reason for us all to be living very differently. But I think there is something as a writer of, I always come back to that thing of there's a reason why Virginia Woolf wrote A Room of One's Own, and just that importance of space as a writer. And I know for myself, just having that space at home, but also being able to go to different spaces is really crucial.
It is, yeah. Sometimes at home, I don't know about you, but sometimes especially if there's a part of me trying to sabotage myself a bit and kind of going, I don't really want to do this writing today. Suddenly I'll be like, I could put some washing on, I could go and unload the dishwasher. And sometimes you just have to be able to step away from all that stuff, don't you? But that's not currently an option, but it will be. It will be again one day.
So I was wondering about how COVID has affected your writing life in general, other than just being at home and everything being at home. Would you normally be going out to be teaching at Falmouth or doing some other stuff like that?
A few bits and pieces. I do pop into, my husband Craig teaches writing for children at Falmouth, and I do pop in when they're doing YA, which I did this time via Teams. Right. So that it's not quite the same, is it? I also teach courses for the Arvon Foundation sometimes, and I've done one of those over Zoom before Christmas, so that was a totally different experience, teaching a kind of full-time writing course for a week over Zoom.
Gosh, yeah.
It was better than it sounds like it's going to be. I did enjoy it, but it took a lot of getting used to, and it actually made me be much more organised, because rather than just normally when I go and teach a residential course like that, I'll just stand in front of a flip chart and write things up as I think of them, and it'll be much more improvisational. And this time I had to put everything into slides beforehand so I could flick through them while I was talking, and keep telling people to keep their microphones on and jump in and talk if they wanted to, because otherwise it's much easier to slip into a kind of going through a slideshow. Talking, when it's much nicer when you've got a bit of back and forth.
It's really interesting, isn't it? It does change things, because I think I said to you before that I did also I did an Arvin course as a participant this year, and I really
Yes.
enjoyed it, but I was really surprised at how well it worked. And I have noticed, both from kind of hosting workshops with the Writer's Block and being participant on various online workshops, there is that difference. Normally when someone's leading a session, or when I've led a session, there's a lot of that back and forth and kind of organically working off of the moment.
Yeah.
And that, in a way, is where it's more difficult, because there's the turn your microphone on, turn your microphone off element.
Exactly.
But it does kind of
Yes.
offer space for quite a kind of snappy, well focused session, I guess.
Yeah, I was surprised at how well it worked once we got used to it. But it's just different, isn't it? I would much rather be with people in real life. And also, you know, when you're writing, I've always really enjoyed the bits where you get to step away from the laptop and your book and go out and talk to actual human beings. I love that part of it, and I love book festivals and travel and all of those things that we haven't been able to do this year.
That is so true, isn't it? It's something I think I was talking to Anna about in the last podcast. Was it's so easy to say, oh, you're a writer, you work from home, you work on the computer anyway, nothing's changed. But I think because so much of that time is on the computer, focused on your own words, there's extra emphasis on the importance of getting out and about and connecting with people and sharing with your readers.
Yes, totally. I love it when you get to actually meet readers in real life. It's so different from social media or anything that you can do on your computer. One of the last things I did before this lockdown, one of the last trips I did was to a book festival in the Netherlands, and it was just magical. It was in the summer of 2019, and I went by train to London and then to Brussels and then on to Amsterdam from there, and then from there on to Eindhoven, where the festival was. And it was, looking back on it, I got the thing like Instagram does of saying, this is what you were doing a year ago. And I got that in June, I think, and it felt so alien to look at this. It was so hot and so sunny, and there was like the canals in Amsterdam. I did something at Waterstones there, and then went on to this festival where we had a day of, it was a YA festival, and it was just so much fun. There were so many readers and they were so engaged. It was so exciting, and I really, really, really miss that side of life.
Gosh, it's so surreal, isn't it? A friend phoned me the other day and said, oh, Facebook just told me a year ago I was in India playing with monkeys. And I thought, how is that possible? It just felt so far away for her. And yeah, I could barely even remember that she'd gone.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. I mean, travelling is it plays a big part in a lot of your books, doesn't it? A lot of them are set abroad.
It does, yes. Yes, it does. I started writing fiction when I was travelling, because I was travelling for as a journalist in my old life, when I was a not very good journalist. And I was looking back on it, I found a way while working at a newspaper to write something that was completely fictional. So that was a little clue to me. I mean, you could say that a lot of what's in newspapers is completely fictional, but this was a column. It was in the era of Bridget Jones, and it was a column in the Guardian sports section where I would pretend that I lived with a bloke who was obsessed by football, and it was actually very sexist looking back on it. But at the time, I was just like, "Yeah, I'll write a column for you." But it was completely made up. So that was my first clue, and then I moved on from that to write a travel column, which I was very surprised the travel editor let me do, but she did, where I went away on my own for a year and wrote a column for the travel section while I was there. And that was where I started thinking I have finally got time and space to actually start trying to write a book. And also I felt like the backpacking circuit around Southeast Asia in particular would be a great setting for a thriller. So I started writing there. So I suppose I started writing travel-based thrillers and then kind of carried on, although the kind of books I've written have changed since then. But I love it. I love going to a new place and just looking at it and then writing it all down. It's one of my very favourite things.
Yeah, well, me too. It's funny that, I guess, like you saying with yourself, I was always writing and was always interested in writing, but for me, starting longer projects did start as well on a big trip away. And
oh, did it?
yeah, it's something about being somewhere new that my mind kind of opens up to observing more, I think. And then I guess there's the time and space as well to be writing down more, and new things kind of inspire new thoughts.
Completely, yes. And you're so completely away from your day-to-day life. It's like everything is exciting. Every little detail is, you see the little differences. And I love feeling like a stranger and a foreigner somewhere as well, and seeing things that are so far removed from, in my case, true.
Yes. I mean, I noticed that you, at some point over the last few months, put a tweet out saying that you'd gone to Newlyn for the day to plot a new book. Yeah. Was that kind of adventure enough to be able to get something new going?
Yes, it was quite exciting. Yes. Yes, that was obviously before this lockdown, and it was a nice sunny day, and all my kids were busy doing their own stuff, and I just thought, I'm going to get a train to Penzance and go for a walk. And it was lovely. And I did end up sitting on the stony beach at the Newlyn end of Penzance, plotting a book, and then walked up a little bit beyond that. So that was very exciting. So that was a very 2020 bit of excitement, to sit on a train for 40 minutes and then feel like I was on holiday.
Gosh, but it is, isn't it? I mean, I get a bit nostalgic about the thought of sitting on a train now.
Yes, absolutely. It does feel quite exotic now.
So did you know you were going there to plot? Did you kind of have a book in mind? My next book might be set around that area, or did you just have an urge that day of maybe something lies there?
Well, a little bit of both. I'd been thinking I'd like to write another psychological thriller for adults, because my most recent books have been YA and then a horror book, which is currently only published in the US. So I thought I might like to go back to where I began, really, and write a psychological thriller. And I knew, because it was 2020 at the time, that I was going to have to find my setting a lot closer to home. So I did go off there with a notebook, but then I did a lot more plotting than I expected to, right. Just sitting on the beach looking at the sea.
Oh, it's just lovely. I thought, gosh, what a nice kind of gift to yourself as a writer, because it is important to take yourself to the scene of where you're going to be writing, or at least I find that a really important element of getting into the story. And yeah, was it difficult kind of leading up to going, oh, okay, it's 2020, I'm going to write a book set here? Was there kind of struggle there, or were you deep in the middle of getting your other books out anyway, that you weren't actually feeling that frustration yet at writing something new?
Well, I think since one thing that this last year has done is make me, I suppose, appreciate Cornwall a lot more. Not that I didn't appreciate it before, but it is a really interesting place, isn't it? And I've now got on the go this psychological thriller book, which is a little bit further advanced now, and I think my next young adult book, which won't be published for a long time because the one that was supposed to be out last year is now coming out this year, and it's pushed everything back a bit. But anyway, the next YA book I'm going to write is also a kind of Cornish set, Agatha Christie inspired young adult murder mystery, which is just, I'm having loads of fun plotting that as well. So that means that quite soon I'll be finding that I'm writing two books at the same time, and both of them are very much anchored into Cornwall, which actually is something I'm really enjoying. It's a nice thing to do, to actually have to stop and look at the area around you a little bit more. And there's so much here now with I suppose the effects that Brexit is going to have, and the whole issues of second homes and COVID and people coming down. Not that I'm writing about Brexit and COVID, because I don't think anyone wants to read about that, but I think as a sort of background to the place, there's lots and lots of undercurrents around. It's a really interesting thing to actually force yourself to tune into it a little bit more.
It is true, isn't it? Because there is always a lot going on, but I mean now in particular does feel rife with it, and why not start where you're stood? I've noticed that several of your other books do also have Cornwall featuring in them.
They do, yes, they do.
Is it kind of a source of inspiration? Is that why you ended up down in Cornwall, certain elements drawing you here?
Yes, I do. I mean, it is a really unique place, isn't it? It's really wonderful. I do love living here, and I love it that my children have grown up here. I've been here about 12 years now, and it very much feels like home, and it's lovely to go away on these trips when one can, and then come back to Cornwall again and feel feel like I'm really back home. So yeah, I love it as a place to write, and I love it as a place to write about. And it is actually probably quite good for me to not be able to go anywhere else for a little bit, and to have my writing totally focused around here. It's good, and I think it's also somewhere that people are interested in. A lot of people come down here on holidays and see one side of it, and then there's a whole other side of it, of what life is actually like.
That's really
for
true.
people down here.
That's really true. It's interesting. That does strike me in your work that you seem very interested in current issues and what's going on at the moment. I mean, I started reading your Things to Do Before the End of the World. Thank you so much for sending that to me. And I was really struck by the diversity of issues and scenarios, and just, I mean, even the fact that talking about the climate crisis, but in such a particular way of tuning so deeply into it being so real. And is that really what fuels you, kind of seeing what's happening and wanting to involve that in your book somehow?
Yes, it's an interesting time, I suppose, isn't it, to be alive? And there's so much happening. I think, I'm sure you find it as well, that if there's something playing on your mind, it does tend to come out in your writing. So climate change, although it's been kind of shoved out of our consciousness a little bit by all the more immediate crises at the moment, it is always there, and it is something I worry about a lot for the next generations. So with Things to Do Before the End of the World, which is the book that should have been out in 2020 but is actually going to be out later this year instead because of COVID, obviously. Yeah. I wanted to look at climate change and kind of push it to its extreme. So I kind of found a fictional way of bringing it so that the world is about to end in a number of months' time, because of something I skate over the science of very, very rapidly. So
it's just still very real.
Sciencey thing here. And then, yes, just how would it feel if you knew that this was going to be the last summer of human life? So that it was quite fun to play with it, but also quite scary.
I can really hear it, actually, that there's something in you that gets excited about the idea. Oh, this could be fun. Oh, that could be an experiment. Is that kind of how writing feels to you? Like, oh, a playful element.
Yes, I suppose things like scary things going on. I think that's how I ended up writing horror. It is scary things that are going on, but then the more you look at them, the more you see other aspects of it. And I suppose in writing about something, you are in a way changing it into entertainment, but also trying to make other people think about certain elements of things that are going on. Right, it's a strange thing, isn't it? Writing.
Yeah, yes, no, absolutely. I mean, that was, I guess, two of the things on my mind as well. Was I thought, wow, is there a certain part of you that wants these things discussed, as in the environment is important to you, and sharing that is important. But also I kind of thought, how do you write these dark things? How do you go to sleep at night? But is it kind of a way of you working through them yourself to make them? Yeah.
Yes, I think so. I think if you kind of get your dark side out onto a page, it makes everything feel, it's kind of almost therapy, I think, for me to write down the worst case scenarios, and then everything feels a little bit lighter in real life. But yes, the climate issues very much is something that I think we all ignore, or I don't know what you would do. I before all of this, I had done my very best to stop going on planes, and that was why I went to that Netherlands festival by train. I hadn't been on a plane for quite a while, and now, of course, there hasn't been the opportunity to anyway. So, but then what do? You stop flying. It makes no difference whatsoever to anything, and I think all you can do is try and do your own best and sign all the petitions for all the good that does. I don't know. It's very easy to feel hopeless, I suppose, and by writing about it, you feel a little bit less hopeless, but I don't really know why, because it doesn't actually change anything.
That's amazing. No, but it's a really interesting thought, because I guess there's some sense of self-empowerment that can happen by getting to explore the topic on the page, and something does happen from it. I mean, I was so struck by how different this book, Things to Do Before the End of the World, was to things I'd read when I was younger. I just thought, gosh, if only there had been books like this, because we do know that now that I think young people are really aware of quite huge issues that potentially some people are still saying, oh, you're too young, you shouldn't be thinking about these things. But actually, they're already, a huge amount of people anyway, are already thinking about the climate crisis and the effect that might have on their future and these kind of darker areas. And so to find that empathy of someone writing about that, I mean, who knows what comes from it, but we know that empathy is a really deep place, a positive kind of place to go to.
Yes, and I suppose it is something that we, like, I suppose capitalist modern life ignores because it's more convenient to just ignore it and carry on doing what we're doing. So I suppose the more people are writing and talking about it, the more difficult it becomes to ignore,
yes.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
But yes, I agree. I look at my children and look at the world that they're coming into. They're like, my eldest is 19 now, and all of them had their freedom of movement taken away that we all had when we were younger. And they weren't even able to vote. I hate Brexit so much, and just seeing the effect that's having on their generation when none of them voted, none of them were able to vote in that election, and here they all are, sort of all the generation who are teenagers, 18, 19, 20, who didn't have any say in it whatsoever, suddenly have their horizons cut right down. It's I do always worry for them. I am very concerned for their generation, for the world that they're stepping into. Seems like it's a very, very weird one.
Is it having children yourself that kind of led you to writing YA? Because I am really moved by how you can empathise so deeply with that age range. I wonder if that's something that's kind of come more recently.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I got into it by accident, I think. I'd written this whole string of travel-related psychological thrillers, and then I got to the last one of those I wrote was called The Sleeper, and it was set on the sleeper train between London and Cornwall, which was really, really fun to write. And then I'd finished that. It sold quite well, better than a lot of my other ones, and my then publisher, really wanted me to write more of the same, just to write basically another version of that same book. And I had a completely different book that I'd started writing, which was set in the Arctic, and it was about a young woman who, she was there and she didn't really know why she was there, and there was snow all around. It was a kind of very image-driven thing, I think. I just had this vision in my head of her in the snow, not quite knowing what she was doing there, trying to work things out. And so I was trying to develop that, and my then editor basically hated it, but she didn't quite put it like that, in that very polite publishing way. She was like, well, I feel that if you made it a little bit more conventional, it might, that kind of thing. Yeah. So she hated it, and we had this kind of back and forth about whether we could compromise the book that I wanted to write into the book that she wanted me to write, and decided in the end it just wasn't working. So I was trying at the same time to start writing the book I was meant to be writing, which was the only way I was going to get a publishing contract, which was the thing. I was at that point a single mother of 3 much smaller children, and I really needed, and it was my main income. So anyway, in the end, it was a long story, but it just didn't work out. So I decided I'd write my Arctic book and just really, really step up all my freelance work to keep afloat, which I just about did. Right. So then I'm there with this Arctic book, looking at it and thinking it was almost working, but it wasn't quite working. And then when I made the protagonist a bit younger, she was in her 20s, I made her 17, and suddenly it all worked, because it kind of worked as a coming of age story. It just needed that bit of extra element of her being in that sort of magical place between being a child and being an adult. And then, of course, that meant that suddenly I found that meant it was YA, which completely changes the whole publishing process. It wasn't something I was really aware of before, but I then ended up moving within the same agency I was at. I switched to a children's agent there, who knew all about how YA works, and she was fantastic. She was actually only at Curtis Brown for about 2 years, and in that time she helped me get my book, my Arctic book, kind of into shape as a YA book, and she sold it to Penguin. So that was two years good work as far as I was concerned. And then she left, so that was amazing. I felt very lucky to have had her so focused. Yeah. So she, in the end, she sold that book to Penguin, and then I suddenly found that I was writing YA. So that was it was a happy accident.
That's amazing. It's really lovely to think that just kind of following organically what the story brought to you and what worked for it has led to this place. And are you now quite purposeful about what you feel is important to be portraying in YA, or is it still just that you are saying what you were seeing or what you're thinking? Because I'm really aware that there are. So in Things to Do Before the End of the World, there's LGBTQ characters. You discuss mental health issues, and we've got that really commonplace of having four parents, the two parents and the two step parents, that I actually think that rarely comes up in literature, but that is such a common scenario. And I just thought, are you thinking actively, what's happening for young people these days? Or
I suppose I'm not kind of sitting down thinking, right, here's my checklist, got to get all of this in, but it's, I suppose, I'm bringing in bits of my own experience, bits of my children's experience, bits of their friends. I'm terrible with their friends. I always like trying to mind, or back in the day when they used to be able to come to our house, I would be always trying to mind people for what they think about things. But yes, I suppose, I mean, I grew up with a stepfather and a stepmother and like all the different parents. And in Things to Do Before the End of the World, there's a much younger half brother and sister who are very much inspired by my younger half brother and sister from my dad's second marriage, who are now Theo, my much younger brother, is now a news correspondent in Moscow, and my little sister Stella is producing the second series of Gentleman Jack. So they're very much not the little tiny toddlers anymore. But I was kind of 16 and 18 when they were born, and I had very much the same babysitting relationship that Libby does in the book with them, and I just loved it. I think that's a really nice relationship that you don't really see very much portrayed in anything, and it can be lovely. You like whatever the adult generation has done, the younger generations make their own connections, and it's can be a really lovely lifelong thing. I now talk to my little tiny brother and sister in Moscow and Leeds, where Stella's currently filming. Wow. We talk every Sunday with our dad, and it's really lovely. So I suppose I just wanted to get in some of the experience of family is very much not necessarily two parents, two children, conventional household. It could be just so much more interesting and
it's
fun.
So lovely to kind of give space to those elements in that time of life. Like you said, it's a very soft time in our lives, and I really like this thing of you saying, well, what happens in the adults' lives moves on and obviously impacts the younger lives, and they're experiencing it very differently. So to kind of give that attention and portray it is just such a brilliant gift. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about, I'm realizing we're talking all about Things to Do Before the End of the World, but if you could sort of describe what the book is and how you kind of came to this story.
So it's a story of, the protagonist is called Libby, and she's 16 at the beginning of it, and she's very shy. And that, I suppose that came from when I was younger. I was very shy, and I can really remember how difficult it was to speak to people. I grew out of it as I grew up, but she's at sixth form college, and she just finds it really, really difficult to come out of herself and talk to people. But the one thing she does love is acting, so she can do it when she's pretending to be someone else. But anyway, she's there at sixth form college, and then this announcement pops up on everybody's phone that this kind of vague sciencey thing has happened, changing the atmosphere as things melt in the ice caps, and humans won't be able to breathe the air anymore, and that the end is going to come on September the 17th, which I picked because it's my husband's birthday, although I then felt a little bit bad about it. I think it just felt like, it felt like a memorable date for me. So yeah, his birthday is now end of the world
brilliant.
day. And also because I wanted to have a September date when, so there could be one last increasingly hot summer on Earth. So then there's the whole idea of what do you do when you know that time's running out? How do you spend the last, from the beginning of the book, approximately 8 months of your life? And then there's a tiny bit like it might not happen, they might be able to correct it, it might be okay. So it's not definite that everybody's going to die on this day, but it's probable. So she and her mum and stepdad end up going to Spain and renting a lovely house there with a pool and just deciding to wait it out there for a little bit, get away from the craziness. And then a cousin that she didn't previously know she'd had gets in touch from America and says that she's coming over and she's going to come and visit them. She's travelling, trying to do everything she possibly can before the end of the world. So this cousin Natasha turns up and she's very charismatic and very charming, and she wants to take Libby for some adventures while they still can. So I won't go into what happens after that, but they go to Madrid and they go to Paris, and then things unravel a little bit and nothing turns out to be quite what she thought it would be, and it gets very hot and very heady, and yes, lots of things go wrong.
Oh, it's amazing. It's so interesting how appropriate it is to this time. I couldn't believe that you could have even managed to kind of create in your head what it might feel like for everything to stop and to think that things could be coming to an end so close, and what would you do with that moment and what would become important to you, because I think that's all kind of going on for a lot of us at the moment. Does it feel kind of eerie to you too?
It does feel eerie, and it also feels quite chilling to think. I now look at that book and it makes me feel a bit wistful, because they've got hot sunshine, everybody's travelling, everybody's going to parties. There's I actually partly wrote it as a response to Brexit, because it's a lot of it is set in Europe and Spain and France. So I was kind of wanting to write about Europe. There's a lot of European travel, a lot of trains and sunshine and amazing cities. And I look at that now and think, oh, wouldn't that be nice too? And then obviously it wouldn't be nice, because the world would be going to end. But even my apocalyptic book now looks quite aspirational to me from here.
I mean, that's true. That element of it is, but it's responding to a different crisis. But a lot of it did really amaze me at how true to form it was, though. The kind of feelings that came up, at least that emotional response, and how different people respond to it, and what people choose to do. And have you kind of noticed, oh, actually, I was a bit spot on there. This is how things go, or have you kind of seen that there are many differences in current day? This current situation is so strange, isn't it? I had my previous book, which isn't yet published in this country, and I don't know if and when it will be, because it's a pandemic book. So I wrote this pandemic horror book before the pandemic came along, which does also completely freak me out. And in that, I had done a lot of research into what would happen if there was a pandemic, and came up against ideas of lockdown and things like that, and it's actually set just after the pandemic, so it doesn't come into it very much. But the thing I didn't foresee very much in that book, I think I gave it a little glancing mention, was people protesting against it and saying it was a hoax. And it's just, you can't really ever quite predict what people will do, can you? And I suppose looking at things to do before the end of the world now, there's a sort of big movement to travel, to see your family, to go to other places that are important to you, or places where you might have roots and that kind of thing. It feels like it's all about movement there, and here we are with the absolute opposite of being able to go anywhere. So I can't wait to be able to just travel again. It will be amazing, won't it? Yeah. Oh gosh, I travel in my mind all the time now. How has it been having the book be postponed? Because that's quite a huge shit. I mean, I imagine that book feels quite far away to you as well now, and to kind of be still sitting waiting to do that launch and the events and everyone asking you to kind of enter back into this world that you left behind a while ago. How is that for you?
Yes, it is strange. I completely understand why it was postponed. Its original publication date was I think July 2020, and it was, I think about April, Penguin said they would be postponing it to 2021, and I completely understand why they did that, and it will be lovely to have it out this year and to finally see it. It's got a lovely cover. It's bright red, and it's got the Eiffel Tower on it, and it looks lovely, and it'll be really exciting to see it. It does. I mean, apart from anything, all these books being postponed has a huge knock-on economic effect. So that the publication of that book was my main work event for the year economically,
Right.
and so that then got postponed to next year. So everything gets kind of pushed. All the books get pushed back a year. I've written my next YA book, which is completely different. Again, it's a kind of paranormal romance set in a shopping mall in a kind of Torquay, although it's not called Torquay. So completely different again. And I'm just doing the final edits of that one and really, really enjoying it. But then I'm thinking that'll be out in 2022, and then this next one, the Cornish Agatha Christie YA book that I'm also slightly working on, just beginning to, that will be for 2023.
Wow.
So it begins to all feel a little bit distant future.
Gosh, that is, I hadn't even actually considered that element of it. That, yeah, and I imagine people are receiving advances that then aren't going to be able to be kind of any more added to that for a while longer. And,
Yeah.
because often it will be split out over time depending on when your book's released, won't it? So
it will. It'll generally be a third for signature, a third for delivery of the actual finished book after some edits, and then a third on publication. So the publication money is a significant amount of any author's income, I think, and it has a big knock-on effect.
And also just thinking that delay then is never quite going to stop, is it? So from now for a while, you'll be releasing books. I mean, it's always quite a while since finishing writing a book that a book is released, would you say? Or
yes, it is. It's I think generally for your first book, it feels to me like for your first book it's the longest. It'll be maybe 2 years or so, and or 18 months, and then as you get into a cycle of writing a book every year, if that's what you're doing, then the amount of time a publisher is happy to let elapse between you finishing it and then publishing it becomes shorter, as they I suppose they know how it all works, and they know that you can work with them, and they don't need to build in quite as much safety time. But yes, it is very strange to have that extra year's break between finishing the book and seeing it on the shelves, with things to do before the end of the world. I just finished the last proofread just when lockdown came, so that was in March, and then I was expecting it to be it was then going to be out in July, but no, I haven't actually seen it for a while now. It'll be lovely to see it when it becomes a physical.
Gosh, it's
physical
so
copy of
interesting. It's been funny for me seeing some of my friends. I did a master's in Bath Spa a few years ago, and a couple of them
lovely.
of just having their first books out this year and at the end of last year. And it's so wonderful to see these books finally in book form. But like you say, it's their first books, and it has been 4 years now, and kind of realizing that, kind of doing that clock up of, oh my gosh, to stay with the story that long and work through it. And yeah, I wonder where they're at with their next books. But so do you say you normally do manage to write a book every year? Is that your regular?
Yes, I generally do. I'm at the moment, I've got lots of different books at different stages on the go. I'm just trying, partly for economic reasons because of the delay of this book, but I'm trying to write, to kind of keep a few things going at a time. But yes, I do generally write a book every year in normal times.
That's phenomenal. I mean, you're prolific. It's phenomenal how many books you have already written. And this thing of writing several at once, you're saying that's a bit more to do with today, or would you often find yourself with 2 projects going at once?
I think generally, if you could be writing a book and thinking about the next book, and I know every author says this, that when you're in the middle of writing a book, and it does, of course, become really difficult, and you can get really bogged down and annoyed with it. And then the next book, the idea for the next book will sort of be glistening in the distance, kind of going, right, me, I'll be much better, and it'll look all lovely, all lovely and glittery and perfect over there. So I think I do have quite a few things at different stages at the moment on the go, but I know that, like, now I'm doing the last round of edits for my next YA book, and that's the thing that I'm actually doing.
Right.
And the rest of them are things that are not commissioned, that I'm basically writing for my own entertainment at the moment, and then I'll see what happens with them.
And do you kind of dip in and out of all of them each day normally, or do you try and allocate time for each one separately?
Well, my current lockdown strategy is that I'll edit 20 pages of the YA book, just go through that, and that'll be the first thing that I do. And then I quite like to wake up early and do that if I can, although it doesn't always work out like that. And then I'll get my children into their online school and all of that stuff, and then just see what I'll do. Something else then, have a look at the files that I've got open on the computer and see what I feel like doing, and do a little bit more. There's something quite freeing, I think, about writing something where you can just write anything, because nobody's particularly planning to publish it. So just write whatever you like and see where it goes, and that could be the most fun, I think, just writing and seeing what happens.
That is lovely. Yeah, and I think it's really important to keep that element going. I'm telling myself this right now because I know I'm struggling at the moment, or I have been for a couple years now, with having multiple projects on at once that involves a lot of editing. But it always surprises me. I'm seeing this pattern now that something new is happening between the seams without me even knowing it. So by the time one project gets finished, I suddenly look down and realise I've got a whole other new one waiting to be edited.
Brilliant.
But I think it's really important that between the seams I am finding that time to be writing something.
Yes, it really is. Yeah, I think that's the joy of it. And you can write I don't know if you find this, but I find I can write just a little bit onto a new project and then come back to it a week later, and my subconscious has been doing something, and I'll know exactly where it's going or what's going to happen next. And I think that's quite nice when you can leave it to the back of your brain to kind of work on it without you knowing about it.
Yes, there is something like pleasing. That, isn't it? It's amazing. I mean, because I do notice that where I haven't even necessarily been thinking about the thing actively, or sometimes I'll wake up as though I've dreamt about it, and I will kind of have a deeper sense of what's happening. It is just going on in that subconscious somewhere. It's amazing.
Yes. Yeah, it feels like you're cheating a bit, doesn't it, when you're kind of working on it without even knowing you're working on it. It's brilliant.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why, though, it's the job that never rests, isn't it? It's
yes, absolutely,
with you all the time. So you mentioned this horror book, and I am really curious about how is this that you've ended up with a book that's published in the States and you don't even know if it's going to come over here.
Yeah, it's really random, isn't it? I wrote this, but I wrote it thinking it was a sci-fi book, but it turns out to be a horror book, which is more of a publishing industry classification thing, I think, than anything. So it started when I found a copy of a John Wyndham book called Chucky in a charity shop, and Chucky is I'd read it years and years ago, really inappropriately young, and it's about a little boy who gets a kind of imaginary friend. It's a voice in his head, and then it turns out to be a little bit more sinister than that. And that I reread it, and it really stuck with me. And I had this idea of a boy with a sinister imaginary friend. And then I started writing about it, and then I found that I was writing this kind of sci-fi horror story. So it's another thing I wrote just for my own entertainment, and I sent it to my agent, and she liked it, and I did a bit of editing on it and made it into a proper book, if you like. And then she sent it out a bit, and her colleague in New York also sent it around there, and the publisher that ended up buying it was an imprint of Penguin New York, so they published it in December, at the beginning of December, which is great. It's in hardback, and I'm hoping that by the time the paperback comes out at the end of this year, the pandemic will be a little bit behind us, because it just feels so weird, because it is set at the end. It's the illness from the pandemic that this little boy in the book, Billy, he's 6 and he's really ill, and then he pulls through and gets better, but he gets better with an imaginary friend in his head, who everybody first of all thinks is, it's great, it's helping him get better, he's explaining the world to her and talking to her all the time, and his mother, who's one of the main protagonists, sees it as a completely positive thing, and then it starts to get more and more sinister, and he's doing more and more weird things to on the instructions of Delphi, the imaginary friend. So yeah, it was just purely by chance that the publisher that picked it up first was in America. So I have this kind of weird thing of it's set here. It's set in near future London, and I didn't write it as an American book, but it now is, which is again just an example of how random life can be, really, in this world.
I mean, I guess you'd never imagined that, particularly if you say like it was written set here. I mean, I wonder if that appeals. That has, we often will watch American films, let's say, and I wonder if something about that book and that setting would they see as appealing to an American audience in a way you couldn't perceive.
Yeah, maybe it's very strange. I mean, it's been lovely. I've had a really great time. I've done lots and lots and lots of podcast interviews and radio interviews and things over there, and it just feels really strange, because then if I talk about it on my social media or anything, almost everybody is in Europe on my social media, right. And then I have to kind of go, oh no, sorry, you can't actually buy it, sorry.
Wow.
So it's very strange.
Tell me about the pen name. So you're Evie Green. Is that for that book that you're Evie Green?
Yes, that is. Yes, because it's a horror book, and because my most recent books, particularly published in the US, have been YA. I think everybody agreed that I should use a pseudonym so that I don't really want any 11-year-olds particularly buying it thinking it's a YA book. So it's just to differentiate it as a completely different sort of book. So yeah, Green is my husband's surname, and Evie was just felt like a nice name to use. It was a pseudonym that took me about 20 seconds to come up with it. Not very imaginative one. I could probably have come up with something much more kind of horrifying, but and actually one of the things I'm working on at the moment is an outline for Evie Green's next book, which I'm going to be sending that off to my agent straight after we finish.
Wow. So, does it feel a bit like putting a different hat on? Okay, after this I'm going to become Evie.
Yeah, it does. It's really fun. I set up an Instagram account for Evie, separate from my own one. And although I have neglected it terribly over Christmas and haven't posted anything on it for ages, I do feel like when I'm on Evie's Instagram, I need to be a little bit darker and a little bit more sort of incisive than when I'm on my own one. It's just mainly pictures of walks by the river in Truro, really boring. So when I'm being Evie, I feel like I could be a little bit more, a little bit darker.
I love this. There's a whole other world. It's not just the book that you can kind of create from.
Yeah.
Wow. I don't think I could ever keep up to Instagram accounts or social media.
I can't. I don't think I posted on either of them this whole year, so I must actually do that.
Wow.
There's just too much, isn't there? There's too much to remember.
I do like that freedom as well, though, because I think people can get quite attached to their name as a writer and their kind of reputation, and it must be already something interesting for yourself, the fact that you have crossed several different genres and age ranges. And do you feel attached to who you are as a writer and the name Emily Barr and that, or what that means? Or
not really. I mean, I have really loved having a pseudonym, and I think I quite wish I'd used a pseudonym all along now, because it's just, it feels psychologically healthy in a weird way to separate yourself from the author of your book. So my policy is which has been hard learned over the years, is just not to look at any reviews. I don't look at any reviews at all, not good ones, not bad ones, just nothing. I don't look at Amazon, I don't look at Goodreads, I just don't. In fact, at one point, I find Goodreads is great for readers, but terrible for authors, and people are very, very harsh on there. And at one point, I actually set up some parental controls on my laptop where I had blocked myself from being able to look at Goodreads because it was stopping me writing. You'd see like the one person saying something awful about your book, and then I'll just go into this spiral of like, God, they're right, it's terrible, I shouldn't be writing books. And so I don't look at anything at all, ever. And I think that feels, I feel a lot more equilibrium, as I can focus much more on my writing now that I'm not worrying about what people are saying about it. And I think if I was starting again, I would use a different name for writing from my actual day-to-day name, because it feels really healthy, I think, just to separate yourself from the name that's on the book. Isn't, although I don't know, this is going to make no sense, but I feel like the name on the book is a part of the book. It's a part of the packaging of the book. It's not. It's about what's inside the book, but it's not you as a human being. And I would absolutely use a different name.
I can completely see that.
Starting out again.
I think that's amazing advice, actually, because I think particularly when you're starting out, there is the book is still very much attached to the ego, or at least that's how I feel about my work still. Like I'm saying about these colleagues who've recently released their books, I started finding myself looking at all of their reviews and then really feeling for them of, oh gosh, which one are they taking notes of? Because there are some amazing reviews, and then there's the classic ones where someone just, it wasn't the right book for them, but it comes out sounding really scathing. And yet I still think, well, actually the work is done, and the writer's moved on, and they're into whatever world they're into next. But it's very usual, particularly in modern life, I think, for us to kind of account for our own worth and our own self-worth by someone else's judgment of us and that outside affirmation, rather than the feeling of actually writing the book and what that brings.
Yeah, completely. I think it's, I mean, when I published my first book, Backpack, it was 2001, and Amazon was really quite new then, and there were Amazon reviews, and that was a huge novelty, but there wasn't this sort of, there wasn't any Twitter, and there wasn't the kind of like everything being online, and it's becoming more and more so. I think that you know if you're feeling bad about yourself, you could look online and find like 10 terrible reviews of your books really easily, and I just think nobody should do that. It's let's leave that for readers. I'll read through reviews of books if I'm looking for a book to read, but I will never ever read reviews of my own books, because I know it'll just spiral me into not being able to write anymore. I know it will, so I don't let it happen.
Tell me about, how is it living with a writer then? So if you manage to create that distance from your work and what other people are receiving from it, I know that your husband is also a well-known writer, and so you've kind of still got that world with you everywhere, and he reads your books, I guess, and gives you feedback on that.
Yes, he does. We read each other's books all the time, and he's always the first person I show anything to. So what works well is that we don't write the same kind of books. So Craig mainly writes picture books, and he's got one on the go at the moment, and you would think that writing a picture book was really easy, and one thing I've learned is that it really isn't. Like every single word on every page, it's almost like a poem in a way, in that you've got so few words that every word has to be exactly the right one, whereas I feel like in a novel you can ramble on in any way you want to, and you can sort of ramble on about something that you've thought of for a couple of pages, and it doesn't matter, you can take it out any editing or whatever. Whereas I've never wanted to write a picture book, and now I really feel like it would be a little bit beyond me. So he's writing his things and I'm writing mine, and we read each other's work, and it's really nice. We do slightly struggle for space with so many of us in the house and everybody working from home, but we we just about get around it. We have one room, which is where I'm talking to you from now, which is my eldest son is at university, and he is actually at university. He's on lockdown at university at the moment. So this is his bedroom is our office. So you have to kind of reserve it if you need it. So I'm in here now, and later on I know Craig's got some work calls to do, and so he's booked it for this afternoon. So
it's very democratic
always
of you.
Working around each other all the time in lockdown in particular.
I'm amazed because I think it's quite easy as a writer to get a bit romantic about it, but I loved spending all my time among writers when I was studying, and I think there's all these very famous relationships of two writers, and yet often I've sort of said to my partner, wow, it would be a nightmare in my head because I get so deep in a project, I would be locking that door if I were you, like, no, you're not coming in here, this is my space. But it sounds like you two kind of manage very well to both be in those spaces and share, and not
yeah,
the world.
we manage. I mean, I spend a lot of my writing time writing in bed. I'll wake up early in the morning and just pull up the laptop, and it's particularly in this lockdown, when there's people in every room in the house, the bed has become my office. So I will just get the laptop and go and sit back in bed with it, because it's the only place where I can find a spare room. But I don't mind that, it's comfy.
That sounds great, yeah. I guess there's one more thing that I've been burning to ask you about in terms of space as well, and that is how you found the transition to being a mother and writing, and how as a mum you have managed to kind of find space and time over the years to be having the ability to write your own work.
Yeah, I think my first child was born in the same year that my first book came out, so almost 2001 was a big year for me. So I've been for the past 20 years. I said, oh God, 20 years, yeah. Oh, my child's going to be 20 this year. Oh God. Yeah. I have been juggling the two things, and I've always found it okay. I found when they were very little, it was obviously more difficult, and I did a lot of put the baby down for a nap and quickly do some writing, and using childcare, using family help wherever you can. But basically I have done a lot of kind of setting them up with some Lego or something and rushing off to do a little bit more writing. I've got used, I looking back now, I don't know how I did it when they were very little, because when you've got toddlers it really is all consuming. But we were living in France for a while when my youngest was born. So I was in rural France with a baby, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and the 4-year-old was at school, the 2-year-old went to a childminder. I would write while the baby was napping, and somehow it gets done because you have to do it. I think that was, at that stage, I was very much writing a book a year for headline of my psychological thrillers, and so starting out in journalism, I think the best thing I ever got from journalism was just a massive respect for deadlines. So as long as there's a deadline and someone's actually waiting for it, you find ways of just getting it done when you can, and also using any help you can possibly get. I don't want to be like, I'm sitting there breastfeeding while typing with the other hand. I had a friend up the road who was a childminder. My children's dad, my ex-husband, would take them out and about and do things with them. We'd kind of work around each other, and you just find ways. And then as they get older, it just gets easier and easier and easier. And now they're teenagers, and they wouldn't particularly notice if they didn't speak to me all day, as long as there was food. So it becomes incredibly easy.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's really great to hear how you've managed to make that work for you, because life just throws so many random things our way, and as a writer I think we constantly do have to find ways to be flexible and move around it, and it's not always easy to feel like that's acceptable by the rest of the world, I don't think, but it's our job.
It is, it absolutely is. And I think there is maybe a slight taboo in that I always feel like I need to say I had help. I took advantage of all the help I could get, because I think there is this kind of feeling that if you're a mother you have to be completely focused on your children and self-sacrificing and do everything else around that. And actually, men don't hesitate to get someone else to look after their child so they can write their book or whatever. And I think you need to take the help that's available and balance it up, and you will find a way to do it, because it, life sort of works out.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good advice, and I think we can all take that at the moment, even just for trying to find whatever little space there is that we can make easier for ourselves in order to be able to return to the page. Oh, Emily, thank you so much for talking with me. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been really lovely. Thank you.
Can you let us know when Things to Do Before the End of the World is going to be released, and where we might be able to find it when that happens?
Yes, I think its publication date is currently in May, but I haven't checked lately, so I'll check that.
Amazing. Well, we'll do our best to promote it for you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Words in a Time of Lockdown, a podcast from the Writer's Block, Cornwall. Music production and editing has been by AMP. Hit subscribe and like to support us and hear when the next episode is released. We look forward to sharing another conversation with you next time.